Delayed departure. Brenda Stern slammed the snooze button. Again. The insistent bleating sliced through the remnants of a dream where she was accepting an award for something important. Reality, however, was a chipped mug, lukewarm coffee, and the looming threat of being late. She bolted upright, the threadbare rug a cold slap against her bare feet. Every second counted. A quick shower, more like a strategic dousing, followed by a frantic search for matching socks. Toast popped, burned, and was summarily discarded. Lipstick applied in the elevator, a smear of defiant red against the pale canvas of her face. By the time she reached the airport, Brenda was a tightly wound spring, ready to snap. Security was a predictable torment, the TSA agent's bored gaze lingering a fraction too long on her driver's license photo. She practically sprinted to gate 42, her carry-on bumping against her hip like an unruly child. Early boarding for passengers requiring assistance and families with small children, the gate agent chirped, her voice a saccharine assault on Brenda's frayed nerves. Brenda tapped her foot impatiently, eyes glued to the door. Any minute now, she'd be soaring above the gridlock, one step closer to sealing the biggest deal of her career. This contract was her ticket to the corner office, the validation she craved. Then, he appeared. An elderly gentleman, moving with the deliberate slowness of a glacier. He shuffled forward, leaning heavily on a cane that tapped a rhythmic counterpoint to Brenda's mounting frustration. His suit, though clearly well-made, was rumpled and bore the faint scent of mothballs. His silver hair was neatly combed, but wisps escaped, framing a face etched with the map of a long life. Mr. Abernathy, she later learned his name was, fumbled with his boarding pass, his hands trembling slightly. The gate agent, bless her soul, offered assistance, but he politely declined, a faint smile playing on his lips. Finally, he was cleared to board. He moved slowly, deliberately, down the jet bridge. Each step seemed an exercise in endurance. Brenda watched, her internal monologue reaching a fever pitch. Seriously? Doesn't he know some of us have places to be? A deal to close? This is ridiculous. They should have wheelchairs for people like that. I bet he's going to hold up the entire plane. She glanced at her watch. 5 minutes. 5 precious minutes ticking away while Mr. Abernathy inched his way down the aisle. 5 minutes I could be using to review my presentation, to mentally rehearse my closing arguments. He paused at seat 14B, struggling to lift his small, worn leather bag into the overhead compartment. Brenda's jaw tightened. Of course. He probably packed bricks in there. A sigh escaped her lips, a puff of impatient air. Finally, with a grunt of effort, the bag was stowed. He settled into his seat, carefully arranging his jacket before fastening his seatbelt. Brenda glared at the back of his head. A wave of something akin to guilt flickered within her, quickly dismissed. It's not my fault he's holding us up. He shouldn't even be flying. The mantra played in her head, a justification for her simmering resentment. The boarding process resumed, but the delay had thrown Brenda off. The carefully constructed edifice of her morning routine had crumbled, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. She felt a prickle of anxiety. This deal had to go through. Everything depended on it. And Mr. Abernathy, with his slow, deliberate movements, had somehow become a symbol of everything that stood between her and success. A helping hand. Brenda tapped her pen against the faux marble counter, the rhythmic tick a frantic metronome counting down to a deal she couldn't afford to lose. The older gentleman ahead of her at security, Mr. Abernathy, was moving at a snail's pace. Each item he placed in the grey bin seemed to take an eternity. Honestly, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Sarah, standing behind her, to hear. Some people just shouldn't fly during peak hours. Mr. Abernathy fumbled with his worn leather satchel, its brass buckle tarnished with age. He strained to lift it, his knuckles white against the brown leather. Brenda's patience snapped. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp and laced with irritation. "Could you please hurry? Some of us have flights to catch." Mr. Abernathy looked up, his eyes, a startling shade of clear blue, held a flicker of sadness. "My apologies, young lady. Arthritis, you see, makes things a bit difficult. He attempted a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Brenda rolled her eyes, a gesture Sarah found particularly offensive. When Mr. Abernathy struggled again, the satchel tilting precariously, Brenda, without a word, reached forward and shoved it roughly into the bin. The satchel landed with a dull thud. "There," she said, her tone clipped. "Happy now?" Mr. Abernathy blinked, seemingly taken aback by her abruptness. He didn't reply, just quietly pushed the bin forward. Sarah felt a surge of anger towards Brenda. She stepped forward, catching Mr. Abernathy's eye as he passed through the metal detector. She offered him a warm, genuine smile. "Safe travels, sir," she said, making sure her voice carried. He returned the smile, this time it seemed a little brighter. "And to you, young lady. Kindness is a rare gift these days." Brenda, meanwhile, was sailing through security with practiced ease. Laptop out, shoes off, liquids in a clear plastic bag. Efficient. Ruthless. Sarah watched her reassembling herself on the other side, a whirlwind of designer clothes and expensive perfume. It struck her that Brenda seemed not just stressed, but almost desperate. As Mr. Abernathy collected his belongings, Sarah noticed he was struggling to zip the satchel. The zipper was clearly broken, snagging on the aged leather. He sighed softly, a sound that tugged at Sarah's heart. He didn't ask for help, didn't complain. He simply accepted the inconvenience with quiet dignity. Mid-flight musings. Brenda tapped furiously at her tablet, the glow reflecting in her strained eyes. Mr. Abernathy had asked for water again, his voice barely a whisper above the hum of the aircraft. She ignored him, her focus laser-locked on the contract proposal shimmering on the screen. Closing this deal meant a promotion, a corner office, escape from the drudgery of economy class. A little old man's thirst was hardly a priority. "Almost there," she muttered, her thumb swiping across the glass. "Just need to finalize these clauses." Suddenly, the plane lurched. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Brenda's tablet slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Outside, the wing dipped alarmingly, the clouds blurring into streaks of grey. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, "we're experiencing some moderate turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We expect this to pass shortly." Brenda scrambled for her tablet, cursing under her breath. The woman across the aisle gripped her armrest, her knuckles white. Even the stoic businessman in the window seat looked slightly green around the gills. Sarah, 2 rows behind Brenda, noticed Mr. Abernathy. He sat rigidly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his face pale. He wasn't outwardly panicking, but a fine tremor ran through him, and his breathing seemed shallow. His eyes darted nervously towards the buckled overhead compartment. "Are you all right, sir?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. He turned his head slowly, his gaze unfocused for a moment before settling on her. "Just a little, unsettled by the movement," he replied, his voice raspy. "It's all right to be nervous," Sarah said gently. "Turbulence can be unnerving. Would you like me to get you some water? Or maybe a blanket?" He shook his head, his eyes flickering towards Brenda, who was now glaring at him and Sarah both. "No, thank you, dear. I wouldn't want to trouble the flight attendant again. I've already asked once." Sarah frowned. She glanced at Brenda, who was back to tapping at her tablet, a picture of utter indifference. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the slight bounce of the plane. "Nonsense," she said, her voice firm but kind. "It's no trouble at all. Let me get you that water." Before Mr. Abernathy could protest further, Sarah walked up to the galley. Brenda, however, intercepted her before she could reach the beverage cart. "Can I help you?" Brenda asked, her tone clipped. "Yes," Sarah replied, meeting her gaze. "The gentleman in 14B needs some water. He asked you earlier, but I don't think you heard him." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "I'm busy. He can wait." Sarah's voice hardened slightly. He's clearly uncomfortable. It would only take a moment. The plane gave another violent shudder. A baby started to cry. Brenda sighed dramatically. Fine, she snapped, grabbing a bottle of water and thrusting it at Sarah. Just give him this and tell him to be patient. The flight log. Mr. Abernathy sat in his usual spot by the window, sunlight painting stripes across the worn leather of the armchair. This time, however, he held a book, its spine cracked and pages yellowed with age. Sarah paused, a half-folded blanket clutched in her hands. Reading something interesting, Mr. Abernathy? He looked up, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Just revisiting some old memories, Sarah. Nothing too exciting. He held up the book. This is my flight log. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. Flight log? You were a pilot? He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. For a little while. A long while ago. He ran a gentle hand over the cover. During the war. Second World War, that is. She perched on the edge of the opposite chair, her interest piqued. Mr. Abernathy, a pilot? It was hard to reconcile the quiet, unassuming man with the image of someone soaring through the skies in a warplane. Wow! I never would have guessed. What did you fly? A B-25 Mitchell bomber, mostly. A tough old bird, she was. He opened the log, the paper thin and brittle. Each entry is a ghost of a mission. Dates, times, destinations, and sometimes, a little more than that. Sarah leaned closer, peering at the neat, precise handwriting. Did you see a lot of action? He was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. Then, he turned a page. There was one, a raid on a heavily defended German airfield near the Rhine. We were tasked with taking out a fuel depot. Critical mission. Cripple their air power, that was the idea. He paused, and Sarah sensed a story coming. The flak was intense, he began, his voice low. Like flying through a swarm of angry hornets. We took a hit early on, number 3 engine coughing and sputtering. Couldn't feather it. Losing altitude, losing speed. He tapped a faded entry with his finger. That's here, April 14, 1944. Engine trouble. Flak heavy. Target acquired. What happened? Sarah asked, completely absorbed. Our bombardier, a young fellow named Jimmy, he got us right on the target. Depot went up like the 4th of July. But we were in bad shape. Couldn't maintain formation. The pilot, bless his soul, ordered us to bail. But someone had to stay behind to keep her level, to give us time. Sarah held her breath. You stayed. Mr. Abernathy shook his head. No, the pilot did. Lieutenant Davies. Gave his life for us. We all made it out, but I never forgot him. Never. He closed the log gently. There are a lot of stories in here, Sarah. Some good, some not so good. Sarah reached out and placed her hand over his. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Abernathy. Lieutenant Davies sounds like a hero. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. He was. We all were, in our own way. Just trying to do our duty. He looked back at the book. This old log, it keeps those memories alive. Keeps the names from fading away. Whispers and doubts. Brenda stalked past the waiting area, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the polished tile. Delay. The word pulsed in her temples, a dull, throbbing counterpoint to the chirping muzak. She needed to be in that meeting, closing this deal. Abernathy, with his dawdling and his stories, was a significant impediment. The engine sputtered and died, just like that. Over the Pacific. I thought we were goners. Brenda nearly tripped. Pacific? Engine failure? She slowed, pretending to check her phone, angling her body just enough to catch snippets of the conversation. Sarah, bless her perpetually patient heart, was leaning forward, her expression rapt. Of course, I managed to get it restarted, Abernathy continued, his voice a low rumble, but those were some tense moments, I can tell you. Brenda scoffed internally. Restarted an engine? Over the Pacific? Please. He was laying it on thick, trying to impress the young flight attendant. Probably thought he had a shot. The thought curdled her stomach. Old men and their fantasies. You were a pilot? Sarah asked, her eyes wide with genuine interest. Among other things, Abernathy replied with a modest shrug. Needed to get my men home, you see. No one else knew how. Brenda rolled her eyes so hard she thought they might detach. Among other things? What was he, a superhero in disguise? She could practically see the twinkle in his eye as he spun his unbelievable yarn. She'd bet her bonus he'd never even flown a kite, let alone a plane over the Pacific. She glanced at her watch again. Still no gate announcement. This was beyond ridiculous. She needed to find a manager, demand an explanation, threaten legal action if necessary. Every minute she spent here was costing her money, costing her reputation. As she turned to march towards the information desk, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for anyone nearby to hear, bunch of senile old windbags, clogging up the system. She didn't see Abernathy's reaction, but she caught the flicker of surprise, then something akin to disappointment, on Sarah's face. Good. Maybe the girl would finally see through his pathetic attempts at whatever he was trying to accomplish. Brenda had real problems, real deals, real pressures. She didn't have time for fairy tales and fabricated heroics. She had a closing to orchestrate and a client to appease. Abernathy, with his tall tales, was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle. A captain's recognition. The engines thrummed a steady lullaby, a white noise blanket against the aircraft's subtle dance with the wind. Davies, his face a mask of practiced composure, untangled himself from the cockpit seat. Hours into the transatlantic journey, his muscles craved release. After entrusting the controls to his second-in-command, he entered the passenger cabin. He navigated the narrow aisle with fluid ease, his gaze sweeping over the rows. Most passengers were lost in slumber, heads at comical angles, swaddled in airline-issued blankets. A scattering remained awake, faces bathed in the ethereal glow of personal screens, lost in digital worlds. Then he noticed him. An elderly man sat erect in an aisle seat, a time-worn leather book resting in his hands. His silver hair was meticulously arranged, his bearing radiating quiet strength despite his years. Davies halted, a jolt of recognition hitting him. This wasn't just another passenger. He was a legend. He drew a steadying breath, collecting his thoughts. He approached, his footsteps muted by the thick carpeting. "Excuse me," Davies began, his voice pitched low with respect, slicing through the background drone. The man looked up, his denim-colored eyes crinkling with warmth. A gentle smile played on his lips. "Yes?" Davies extended a hand. "Captain Arthur Abernathy? I'm Captain Davies, the pilot of this flight." Abernathy's smile broadened. He clasped Davies' hand, his grip surprisingly powerful. "A pleasure, Captain. Though these days, Arthur will do." Davies demurred, genuine admiration lighting his face. "With all due respect, sir, you'll always be Captain Abernathy to me. It's an honor to have you aboard." He paused, momentarily speechless. The Abernathy maneuver, it saved so many. A fleeting shadow crossed Abernathy's face, a momentary sadness quickly veiled by his gentle smile. "That was a lifetime ago, Captain. It's aviation canon, sir. Every pilot studies it, dissects it. Your contributions." Davies trailed off, feeling suddenly small. "We stand on your shoulders." Abernathy chuckled softly, a dry, wheezing sound. "Nonsense. Just doing my duty. As you are now. Ensuring everyone arrives safely." He gestured towards the sleeping passengers. "That's all that ever mattered." Truth revealed. The delay stretched on, a rubber band of Brenda's patience pulled taut. She tapped her foot, the staccato rhythm a counterpoint to the drone of the idling engines. Abernathy sat beside her, an island of calm in her turbulent sea, reading his worn paperback. She risked a glance at the cover, something about Spitfires and the Battle of Britain. Figures. Then, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, not with the usual apology, but with a note of distinct formality. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are still experiencing a minor delay, but I wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge a very special passenger on board today. Mr. Arthur Abernathy, would you mind standing for a moment? Brenda frowned. What was this? Some birthday announcement? She shot a sideways glare at Abernathy, who looked as surprised as she felt. He slowly unfolded himself from his seat, a little stiffly, and stood in the aisle. Mr. Abernathy, Captain Davies continued, his voice resonating with respect, for those of you who don't know, and I suspect that's most of you, is a decorated veteran of the Second World War. He flew Spitfires with distinction, served with incredible bravery in the Battle of Britain, and was instrumental in numerous key operations. A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Brenda felt her stomach drop. Mr. Abernathy was credited with downing 15 enemy aircraft, earning him the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar. But beyond the medals, Mr. Abernathy is a true hero, a symbol of courage and sacrifice. He's a living piece of history. Captain Davies paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Brenda's face burned. She remembered her curt tone, her impatient sighs, her thinly veiled contempt. Mr. Abernathy, the captain concluded, we, the crew of Flight 309, are deeply honored to have you with us today. Thank you for your service, and thank you for reminding us what true heroism looks like. The cabin erupted in applause. People craned their necks to get a better look at the unassuming old man in the aisle. Sarah Miller, a few rows ahead, gave him a beaming smile and a thumbs up. Abernathy, his cheeks flushed, offered a small, almost shy wave. Brenda wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The blood rushed to her head, a dizzying wave of shame washing over her. She had treated a war hero like an inconvenience, a roadblock in her path to closing a deal. The irony was thick enough to choke on. She, who prided herself on her efficiency and judgment, had completely misjudged the situation, blinded by her own self-importance. The applause subsided, and Abernathy slowly sat back down, his gaze fixed on his book. Brenda couldn't meet his eyes. The silence between them was thick with unspoken apologies and a profound sense of her own inadequacy. The engines revved, the plane began to taxi, and Brenda found herself wishing, for the first time in a long time, that this flight would never reach its destination. A gentle lesson. The silence in the first-class cabin stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Brenda stared at the polished mahogany of the drink tray, avoiding Mr. Abernathy's gaze. Each glint of light felt like an accusation. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She replayed the scene in her head, her impatience, her sharp words, the dismissive flick of her wrist. How could she have been so callous? So blinded by her own self-importance? The thought of the Henderson deal, the one that had consumed her thoughts all morning, now felt insignificant, tarnished by her own ugly behavior. What did a few extra zeros in her paycheck matter if she sacrificed her humanity to get them? A soft sigh broke through her inner turmoil. She chanced to glance at Mr. Abernathy. He was looking out the window, his expression serene, almost wistful. The sunlight caught the silver strands in his hair, illuminating the gentle lines etched around his eyes. He seemed utterly unaffected by her earlier outburst, radiating an aura of quiet strength that only deepened her remorse. He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. There was no anger, no judgment, only a profound understanding in his eyes. A small, kind smile touched his lips. It wasn't a dismissive smile, but one that spoke of genuine compassion. "Everyone has bad days, young lady," he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. The simplicity of the statement, the lack of condemnation, was almost unbearable. Tears pricked at the corners of Brenda's eyes. She swallowed hard, fighting to maintain composure. I'm so sorry, Mr. Abernathy, she stammered, the words catching in her throat. That was completely unprofessional and rude of me. I was stressed about a deal, and I took it out on you. There's no excuse. He inclined his head slightly. We all make mistakes, he replied. The important thing is to learn from them. Brenda took a shaky breath. I will, she vowed. I really will. She straightened her shoulders, a newfound sense of resolve hardening her gaze. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she could choose to be better. The weight on her chest began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their imminent descent. The familiar hum of the engine shifted, and Brenda felt the subtle pressure change in her ears. As the plane began its descent, she felt a corresponding descent within herself, away from the precipice of self-loathing and towards a firmer, more grounded place. She managed a genuine smile. Can I get you anything before we land, Mr. Abernathy? Water? Coffee? He chuckled softly. Just a safe landing, young lady. That's all I need. He returned her smile, a glint of something almost playful in his eyes. Although, if you happen to have a good joke, I wouldn't say no. Brenda laughed, the sound a little shaky but undeniably real. The tension that had gripped her for hours finally began to dissipate. Maybe, just maybe, she could salvage something from this disastrous morning. Maybe she could even learn something about herself in the process. Change perspective. The chime above the aisle announced their arrival as the light blinked off. Brenda inhaled, the recycled air doing little to soothe her jangled nerves. Beside her, Mr. Abernathy gazed out the window, a small, contented smile gracing his lips as Denver's sprawl unfolded below. A pang of guilt, unexpected and sharp, undercut her anxiety. Mr. Abernathy, she began, her voice a fragile thread. He turned, his gaze clear and penetrating. I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. I allowed the pressure of this deal to dictate my actions, and I took it out on you. That was wrong. He didn't cut her off, nor did he offer a dismissive gesture. He simply listened, his attention unwavering. It was disconcerting, yet somehow reassuring, forcing her to confront the unpleasantness of her conduct. I understand, he responded at last, his voice a gentle rumble. We all stumble. The key is to acknowledge it, and grow. Brenda swallowed hard. I am truly sorry, she repeated, finding strength in the words this time. May I help you with your bag? A quiet chuckle escaped him. That's quite kind of you, Ms. Stern. But I think I can manage. He reached for the worn leather satchel at his feet, his movements unhurried and deliberate. Please, allow me, Brenda insisted, reaching for the bag before he could secure it. The leather yielded beneath her touch, whispering tales of age and experience. It was surprisingly light as she lifted it, far less weighty than she'd imagined. As the plane lumbered toward the gate, Brenda remained at Mr. Abernathy's side, holding his satchel. Other passengers were already surging forward, eager to be free of the metal tube. Brenda noticed how they brushed past Mr. Abernathy, oblivious, their faces reflecting anxieties akin to her own earlier agitation. When the aircraft shuddered to a halt, she carefully returned his bag. After you, sir, she offered, gesturing toward the aisle with newfound respect. Mr. Abernathy's smile was genuine, creasing the skin around his eyes with warmth. Thank you, Ms. Stern. I appreciate that. He moved with understated grace, navigating the crowded aisle with surprising ease. Brenda followed close behind, subtly shielding him from the impatient surge, a marked contrast to her previous disregard. She offered a steadying hand as he stepped into the jet bridge, the sterile light glinting off its metal shell. Moving through the airport terminal, Brenda felt a subtle but profound shift within. The gnawing anxiety about the deal had receded, replaced by a quiet serenity. Observing Mr. Abernathy's calm demeanor amidst the bustling scene, she grasped the value of perspective. She'd been so blinded by ambition that she'd failed to recognize the individual beside her. Reaching baggage claim, Brenda paused. Mr. Abernathy, I hope you enjoy your stay in Denver. He turned, his eyes twinkling with amusement. And I hope you close your deal, Miss Stern. But more importantly, I hope you remember to look up from your spreadsheets now and then and truly see the world around you. He paused, adding with a knowing smile, you might be surprised by what you discover. With a nod, he turned and headed toward the exit, his well-traveled satchel swinging gently. Brenda watched him go, a wave of humility washing over her. The burden of her ambition felt lighter now, balanced by the understanding that real success lay not merely in transactions, but in treating each person with compassion. The deal, she knew now, could wait. The chance to glean wisdom from Mr. Abernathy, however, might not present itself again.